Karl, good to see you. Wasn't that long ago that we spoke. We knew that things were going to pick up speed when President Trump came back into office, but I'm trying to word this differently, but I can't get it out of my head. You don't realize until you're in it now, like you're on the freeway, how fast things are moving. And I'm appreciative that you come on here because, quite frankly, Karl, you and I could talk every week the way things are. There's just new things to talk about every single week. And I don't know about you. I don't see that slowing down.
No, I don't think it's going to slow down at all. If anything, I think the pace of the stuff's going to accelerate. So,
Could it come faster than what is coming out right now, though?
oh, of course.
Well, and that's the other thing too. It's like I told you before, right before we went on. I said I'll put this up tomorrow, but the truth is I don't know that I want to wait because information just expires so quickly in the world we're in.
Well, and yeah, and it's not just that it expires; it's that it gets superseded. And part of it is there's so much information flow that it doesn't have any provenance, and it's impossible in many cases to figure out the provenance before it ends up all over everywhere, right? So, it's the old thing that a lie travels around the world, 5 times before truth gets out of bed. That sort of stuff. Um, and then you add to it that there's an awful lot of folks out there that have every incentive to BS you in some form or another, and it's usually financial, but not always. And so there's a problem there because in a world where there's essentially no filter, and let's face it, the world has at the same time become more vast but also smaller. Okay, in that the time sink. But one of the challenges that has come with this is that go back 150 years, okay? You go into a small little town out west somewhere on a horse and you screw somebody. Well, that's the end of your ability to sell anybody anything in that town, all right? Because everybody knows, and usually what ends up happening is that the town council or the sheriff or whoever comes by and says, hey, buddy, get the F out of here. And by the way, if you come back, not only are we not going to give you a place in the stable for your horse, but we're not going to feed you. And you can't refill your canteen. It would be unwise for you to set foot in this town again. All right, and that's assuming you haven't done something that's worthy of them taking you out to the gallows and stringing you up right there. Which, in some cases that of course would be the case, but if you just screwed people on a general basis, you wouldn't get away with it for very long. And this is one of the reasons that in the world today, actually having some kind of enforcement of the myriad laws, the anti-monopoly laws, the anti-illegal immigration laws, all of these other areas of conduct, actually having a government that will enforce those is so important because I can screw somebody that lives in California, okay? And for them to sue me in a place that actually has jurisdiction, they're going to have to sue me in Tennessee unless the amount in controversy is large enough that they could get diversity jurisdiction and come after me in the federal court. Well, if the insult's relatively small, it's not worth it. All right, I mean, yeah, you could hire a lawyer over here and file suit against me and come after me, but and then you want to go after me criminally, well, you got to get the sheriff over here to get interested in it, all right? Because the sheriff in California has no jurisdiction. So this is where the problem comes from, is that then you have people that band together and do this kind of thing on a concerted basis. They screw people en masse, but you individually have basically no recourse as an individual consumer. There's nothing you personally can do because the insult on an individual basis is small enough that it's not worth it. Now take that same thing and go across a national boundary. All right, China hoses you. I don't care how much money you got. The Chinese government's going to tell you to go to hell. You can't sue in a Chinese court. Okay, so certainly can't do it from America. if you don't have a consistent set of enforceable rules for those people that want to contract and conduct business in a given area, in a nation, in a world where those boundaries are gone, you have chaos. And those people that, I mean, it's an ugly saying, but it's the truth. A thug never stops being one because you ask nicely. He only stops one of two ways. Either believes he's going to go to jail or lose all of his stuff, right? He's going to get sanctioned in some way legally, or he believes you're going to kill him. And that's the only way that it ever happens. Because if, you think about the guy in the old western town. The reason he doesn't come back is that he knows there's a decent chance if he does, he's going to die. All right. Well, that's fear. That's a decent incentive. But how do you do that in today's world if there's no enforcement? And so as a result, you have all of this screwing that gets built into the economy. And then when it becomes a substantial piece of GDP, nobody in the government wants to touch it, because if you go after it, now you're talking about a lot of people losing their jobs. You're talking about companies going out of business. All of this is bad from a standpoint of, everybody wants to see growth, growth, growth. Stock prices must always go up. They can never go down. House prices cannot go down. None of these things can, nothing bad can ever happen to anybody that way. That ended up codified more or less as policy at the DOJ after Arthur Anderson, even though there's no statutory authority to do it. None. Congress never gave anybody statutory authority to ignore big companies screwing people, and yet they do it all the time.
We'll hit the drone story a little bit later. You're talking about, relation to me, it's, and I think I've said this to you before, everything is a big grift nowadays, right? And, with the DeepSeek and then the stable coins and Tether, and even you and I haven't talked since the Trump meme coins came out.
Right.
To me, people were like, well, I didn't have a problem with that. I just think optically it looked bad that, and I know he didn't probably do it. It was the family or whoever runs the branding aspect of it, but it was not.
He approved it.
Right. What did you think about that?
Well, so here's the basic problem with all the cryptocurrency stuff. I don't care which it is. I mean, it's more so in the so-called meme coins, right? But it's true for all of them.
You put Bitcoin in that, Karl? Let me interrupt you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's all under one category.
All crypto, well, yeah, the degree of the problem changes, but Bitcoin is actually in many ways worse than some of these others, because a proof of stake or a proof of work coin, which is, the category that Bitcoin falls into, is a proof of stake and proof of work, which you have to do something in order to generate them. Meme coins are just generated because somebody farted.
Or hawk-tuied. Or
hawk-tuied, yeah. I mean, but they're literally farted into existence. The proof of stake and proof of work coins are even worse, though, because actual real expenditure has to take place. The problem is they're negative sum lotteries. Okay, so if you look at, for example, Mega Millions and Powerball, all right, legal lotteries in the United States, they are negative sum games. And the reason is the guy that owns a terminal and prints up the tickets and stuff, he has to get paid. The state takes typically half of the gate, if you will, the gross. They say they give it to education, but all that really means is that they were able to cut that amount out of the education budget last year. Okay, so don't kid yourself that this actually benefits anybody. It just shifts the burden onto the people that buy the tickets. But you have approximately a 50% in total. If you take everybody that buys tickets, you have about a 50% return on the so-called investment. So the other half gets stolen, essentially. Well, you didn't get anything out of buying a lottery ticket. All right. Meme coins are essentially the same thing. What do you get out of those things? And common cryptocurrencies, the proof of work and proof of stake ones, such as Bitcoin, are even worse, because the people that generate those have to buy, first off, they have to buy the hardware. Then they have to pay the power bill to operate it. All right. And you have frictional losses in transaction because you have to pay transaction fees. So someone has to certify that your entry on the blockchain is good. That has to be done. And the more distributed it is and the larger it gets, the more that costs. So, and there are various schemes that have come up to try to partition that off. You know, Bitcoin has a Bitcash, Ethereum has a slightly different system. And so there's, you know, people recognize that this is a problem, all right? But at the end of the day, there's no utility generated in any of these things, none. And so essentially what these are is private emission of credit with a grift percentage associated with them, and yet people, they're willing to pay it. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you can go buy Powerball tickets too. That's, I mean, well, you do what you want. But there's no value there. There's no actual value. The difference between credit and money is critical to understand, and almost nobody does. Money is what you have after you stick a straw in the ground, draw out a bunch of black tarry stuff, put it through a refinery, sell the gasoline, the diesel fuel, the lubricating oil, the paraffin, all the other stuff you get out of it. And you take what you got for that and you subtract off all those costs. What you have left is money. Credit is simply a promise that you'll do something of value tomorrow. That's all it is. A $20 bill in your wallet could be either, because our government has a habit of emitting money, which really isn't. Everybody says, well, we're going to look at M2 or whatever have you. They are interchangeable. The $20 bill in my wallet and my credit card spend exactly the same way. They're fungible in the economy, but they are not the same thing. And a $20 bill you might have gotten because you put a roof on someone's house and you paid for all the materials, and this is what you got paid minus the cost of the materials and everything else. It also might simply be that you got that $20 bill because the government put a bunch of money in your account on an EBT card. Okay, and you did absolutely nothing of value in exchange for it. So it's very difficult for people to grasp the difference between them. But all of this nonsense with cryptocurrencies, without that lack of understanding, nobody would go anywhere near any of them. I mean, at the end of the day, the only reason you buy a dollar Trump coin, right, or a Melania one, or a whatever, is because you think some other sucker is going to pay more for it. And at the end of the day, the same thing's true for things like Ethereum and Bitcoin. There's no difference. What can you do with an Ethereum coin or a Bitcoin? What can you actually do with it? What can you do with a Trump or a Melania coin? Nothing, except, hopefully, find somebody else that'll give you more than what you paid for it. And the idea that you have these stable coins that are tied to dollars, yeah, okay, prove it. Okay, and oh, by the way, where'd you get the dollars? And why is it that this token is an equivalent thing? I can't pay taxes with it. All right, so there's a problem here. Now, Rumble is an interesting case because I happen to own a small number of shares. There's a tender offer pending as a result of this transaction that they did.
And for people that don't know Tether.
Tether is a so-called stable coin that supposedly is, one of those is $1, okay, in theory. And part of the problem with cryptocurrencies is that how do you move them around rapidly within the system when somebody wants to exchange them? So if you run an exchange, somehow there has to be someone else on the other side of a transaction. It's like anything else. I mean, if you think about stocks are the same way other than the IPO, and that if I buy a share of IBM stock right now, I'm got my screen up here, it's a little over $220 a share. IBM doesn't get any benefit from me buying that share. I bought it from someone else. That person thought that that was a fair price for it and that it would not be higher tomorrow. I bought it because I thought it would be higher tomorrow. Otherwise, I would wait until tomorrow because it would be cheaper. Okay. So the exchange takes place because the two of us both have opposing visions of what's going to happen the next day. Otherwise, the transaction doesn't occur. One of us is right and one of us is wrong. All right. And tomorrow we'll find out who it is. But that's a negative sum lottery because the transaction's not free. The brokerage and the clearing firms, everybody else have to get paid. Now, it's a small amount of money, but they have to get paid. And the idea that you have commissionless trades is nonsense. The brokerages in the middle are just skimming off the spread between the buy and the sell now. It used to be explicit. You paid the $30 for the trade or whatever it was. Now, they're actually paid for order flow. So the way you pay is by getting screwed by the people that are handling the transaction for you. And most people don't understand this. They think the trading is free. It is not free. Nobody works for free, ever. So Rumble had some concerns about, they're publicly listed, traded as RUM, and there were some concerns about their liquidity position. Do they have enough cash flow in order to continue to operate? And Tether came along and said, we'll put a whole bunch of money into you with actual money, okay, which they got in exchange for issuing these tethers, all right? So they had actual cash. And they said, we'll put this in exchange for some stock. And Rumble comes out and says, okay, well, the people that own the shares can tender them into this transaction, essentially give them back to the treasury and get paid in cash, and some of this cash, and the rest, they'll keep for their corporate purposes. Well, the problem with that is that the tender price is $7, and as I'm looking at my screen right now, Rumble's trading at $12.50. Now explain to me why I would sell you something for $7 that the market says is worth 12.5. All right. I mean, that's a no. Okay. I mean, now it may be. I mean, the argument that people have made is that, well, the management of the company wants the price to go down. And I say, well, management may want whatever they want. However, the market says the shares are worth $12.5. Okay. It's kind of like, well, I want you to sell me eggs for $7. Well, in the store, they're $9 for a dozen. Well, why would I sell you eggs for $7 if I get 9 for them? That's stupid. So this is what happens when there's a disagreement, though, between buyers and sellers. Is that, well, the transaction tends not to happen, right? Because you can't force people to give them up. So that's the only way that you could enforce it was if they were to take the company private. But then the shareholders would have to vote on that, and if the price is $12.50 and they're trying to take it private at $7, I'm certainly not going to vote for that. Why would I vote to screw myself out of $5 a share? That's stupid.
So okay. Now, what are your thoughts then with the idea of, you've probably heard this scenario. I had Andy Scheckman on yesterday, and he was talking about an interview he had done in regards to anticipating that in the next 4 years, Trump will introduce a new system because he did an executive order on the whole CBDC, against the CBDC. But then I was reading on X from different handles about that's not where the danger is. The danger is in these private coins.
Well, here at the end of the day, if I can't pay taxes in it, it's irrelevant. Okay. If I have to exchange, if I can't go to the store, and by the way, there's nothing preventing you from having a store that takes oranges in exchange for gallons of gasoline, as long as you don't let me pump them first. All right. The legal tender law says that dollars are legal tender for all debts, public and private. That's what the law says. But there is no debt until I've put the gas in the car. Okay, if the gas is in the ground and we have not transacted yet, we can privately agree to transact for anything we want. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Now, I still have to declare its value on my taxes if I do that, if I do some kind of barter transaction. But there's nothing that says that I, as a merchant, have to take dollars as long as I don't let you have title or possession of whatever it is first. And once I do that, there's a debt. Now you have an obligation to me, and at that point, I have to accept dollars if that's what you offer to pay with. But prior to that, no. I mean, if some grocer wants to price his pounds of ground beef in oranges, he can. And I mean, why doesn't that happen? Well, because exchange is hard, right? So now the grocer has oranges, he needs gasoline. Well, who's going to sell him gasoline for oranges, right? So the reason we have common currencies is because it lubricates commerce. It makes commerce easy. And that's the entire point behind a currency. But the problem with all of these cryptocurrencies is their value isn't stable. And in the idea that, oh, they always go up. Okay, as the person doing the selling of something, I might like that idea. Okay, let's say that Bitcoin is always going to go up. Okay, so I'll sell you a house for 5 Bitcoin. All right, and that's fantastic because 6 months from now, Bitcoin will be $150,000 instead of 100. And gee, that's nice. Okay, now think about you on the other side of that wants to buy the house, and you have the 5 Bitcoin. Why would you give me the 5 Bitcoin for a house if they're going to be 50 grand more 6 months from now? You'd be out of your frickin' mind to do that. All right? So the only reason those transactions take place is that there's a disagreement between the two parties about what's going to happen. But that's true for anything else that doesn't have intrinsic value. All right? Gasoline has intrinsic value. You can put it in a car and burn it up and use it to go somewhere. Natural gas has intrinsic value. You make electricity with it. You can heat your house, which is kind of useful in the winter. But these things have none. And so the entire purpose, if you have no intrinsic value in a thing, is the lubrication of commerce. But lubrication of commerce requires stability. And this is one of the things that we did not take into account. We started playing around with when Ukraine and Russia got into their dust up, and we started sanctioning everybody that looked at us the wrong way. Foreign countries and foreign business interests liked using dollars for their exchange, even if neither end of the transaction was in the United States. And people would say, well, why would you be so stupid as to do that when there's transaction costs involved in changing dollars into whatever? And the answer is the dollar was more stable in its valuation than the Belarusian whatever, okay, or the real, or whatever your local currency is, or for that matter, the currency of the country where the other end of the transaction was. And so you had a very good reason to do it, because if I am going to ship something in international commerce and it's going to take 3 months to get there, I'm not going to get paid until it shows up. If I can't buy the raw materials to make the next batch of stuff with whatever value I get after you pay me, I'm screwed. And so I want something to be, I want my unit of payment to be something that I am reasonably certain is going to be stable enough that that's not going to happen. And that is a key business risk. And that's why that was the case. Well, as soon as we started sanctioning people and seizing their money, okay, well, you were going to pay me $100,000, but now I got zero. Well, I don't want dollars. Give it to me in whatever my local currency is. Yeah, okay, the guy that runs my country is a thug and a strong man and a jackass, and he's running a 15% inflation rate, but at least I know what that is going to be. It beats zero. We did that to ourselves, and we're never going to get it back. That's where a lot of the inflation came from in the last 3 years, because as foreign trade expands, you can issue credit into the system, And that amount of expansion, if it's taking place in your currency, doesn't show up in prices in your country as long as that trade amount in total continues to grow. And as the world grows, so does that volume. Well, we destroyed that. So now when we emit excess credit in the United States, it shows up immediately in the store. We did it to ourselves.
These are things that you had the pandemonium of last week, right? All the executive orders and
Yeah.
the trips to North Carolina, the trips to LA, putting the mayor in her rightful place. But it's these types of things that I think people, I don't know if it's over their head. I mean, not that I'm the smartest guy in the room, obviously right now, not in front of you, Karl. But
Thank you.
but people, I think that they're not paying attention to the problems that we really have. And so I want to shift into DeepSeek because that was something that just popped up yesterday or Sunday night.
Well,
And
it actually didn't. It had been out. It had been more or less out for a little bit of time, but it showed up. Suddenly, people paid attention to it.
Sunday night, I saw it.
Yeah. Suddenly, people paid attention to it Sunday night. And DeepSeek is an interesting situation because for the last several years, and I was asked to be a panelist at an AI conference, and a bunch of eggheads. It was very academic in its focus. Okay, it wasn't a business-oriented thing. It was done by an academic organization, and I was one of several people on one of the panels, so I wasn't like a keynote speaker or anything like that. But as a technologist for a long period of time, the organizers thought I had a perspective that might be useful. And one of the questions that I had for everybody on the panel and everybody in the room is, well, okay, so you build this computer program, but it's worthless without training data, without actually putting data into it in order to get something out of it. Most of the data that is of import is under copyright. Somebody owns it. And while some of that is unregistered, in fact, a great deal of it is, and therefore only real damages can be had. Anything that's been published formally has a registration number from the Copyright Office. If you steal that, you're subject to statutory damages. You don't have to show harm, and they're not small. Potentially can be $250,000 a crack. So that's for each theft, each use, okay? So these numbers, when you think about the amount of data that goes into one of these large language models, these numbers are so large they bankrupt anybody. I don't care who you are. They bankrupt Google, they bankrupt Apple, they bankrupt, I don't care what size company you are. If you get nailed with a statutory damages claim on the training data, you're done, okay? That's the end of your company. So to me, my problem with this whole thing is that there was no logic to what these people were doing, because I didn't see how you could get a usable training set into these things without breaking the law. And while giving the finger to the law has become a sport in America, as I was talking about earlier, eventually you're going to piss off some people that have a lot of money, and they're going to come after you, especially when it's in size like this. So I put that out there, and then there were a lot of other areas of discussion. But the more I thought about this, both at the conference and then, of course, they had a vendor area. Nvidia was there, HP was there, all the various people. And I went and talked to some of them. And there was an awful lot of arrogance in that room, right? Nvidia was absolutely certain that the future of all of this stuff was in the CUDA language, which is the language, if you will, that their graphics cards use, and that they were going to win this game. And by God, everybody else was going to lose, and they were going to win. Okay. And I'm like, I've only been doing this for 40 years, and I've seen an awful lot of people think that they were the top king on the hill, and then along comes David and shoots Goliath. And so I was like, there's just something not right about the way all this felt, right? Well, I had never dug into AI programming, even though I am a coder. And then this DeepSeek thing shows up, and the astonishing part of this is that I am now increasingly convinced that the way we've done this in America has been another grift, and it's been collusive at a extraordinary level into academia, into business. There's a basic economic principle. If you ever take a formal economics class, I don't know if you ever have or not, but one of the first things they'll tell you is that you really don't need anti-monopoly laws, which by the way is a bunch of BS, because in the real world it doesn't work this way. But economic theory says you don't. And the reason economic theory says you don't is if there's 10 people that are all selling carpet in a town, and they all get together and they, in a smoky room full of glasses of scotch and cigars, decide that they're going to raise the price everybody's going to raise the price of carpet about 25%. And of course, they're all going to make a bunch of money because the cost of acquiring the carpet to sell to the customer hasn't gone up. So, this is classic monopoly behavior, right? It's illegal. But the classic economist says you don't need the law that makes that illegal because one of the 10 is going to defect. And when he does, he's going to screw the other 9 because you've got that agreement, but 3 days later, that guy's going to be out there selling it at 15% higher instead of at 25. He gets all the business. The other 9 guys go broke. And so those kinds of structures, in theory, have that check and balance, okay, that prevents them from working. The problem is you are making an assumption when you say these things won't work, and that is that the government doesn't put its fist on the scale and through various forms of bribery and even blackmail, along with the collusion of people, prevent defections. So if you get industry components together, all you have to do is look at medicine to see, crazy evidence of that sort of stuff, right? No matter where you look in medicine, all of their conduct when it comes to how they do pricing and insurance, everything, it's all illegal. It's been illegal for over 100 years. Nobody goes to jail. But why is it that there hasn't been an attempt to actually break that? Well, the truth is that there was. Shortly before Obamacare came in, there was a place that opened up called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. Soup to nuts, cash price. They're responsible for infections that you acquire over a procedure, and every one of their procedures that they do is listed on their website with a price, a number. That's the end. That's it. This much money to have this thing done to a human body. And that's it. Try getting that from your local hospital. You can't. All right? Now, Obamacare made new centers like this illegal. So you had a group of physicians that decided they weren't going to put up with this crap and they were going to try to tear down the wall, so to speak. And Obamacare probably couldn't survive. The challenge would be lost if they'd tried to make that one against the law. So they didn't try to put them out of business. That place is still there. And in fact, you can go have an operation done there right now. But there aren't 500 more of them. And there would have been. Okay. What DeepSeek showed us is that, and when I first saw this, my first reaction was anything that comes out of China has a 50% chance of being a fraud or just a flat out lie until proved otherwise. Why? Because China. Okay. Because that's, it's just the way it is. However, what they said was, okay, here's access, API access. Download this app just like you do with Grok or OpenAI or whatever. And our price for you to run queries ends up being about 3% of what all the other people in the business are charging. Well, now there's two possibilities. One is that they really did come up with a breakthrough on cost. And the second is the Chinese government's paying 97 cents out of every dollar. So, if you think about it, right? There is that possibility, right? So it still could be a lie. And then, unfortunately, however, for the people that believe it is and that it has no impact, the guys that put it together open sourced it. They released the source code. So now anybody can take it, and assuming you have a computer that's big enough and able to run it, you can put it up on your machine. And of course, you have to, fill it full of information, right? You have to fill it full of training data. But because they open sourced the code, that allowed me to take a look at what they were doing. They've done a number of things that essentially has taken somewhere between a cube root and a inverse factorial out of the cost model necessary to run most of these things. Now, how that impacts quality, I don't know. All right, that's a tougher nut. It would be difficult for me to model that without actually putting a machine together and building it myself, and to do it in a way that is actually usable on real tasks. I mean, yes, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than the existing systems, but it's still not something you can do on your desktop computer sitting on your desk. Am I going to go out and spend $20,000 or $30,000 to put together a machine that can run a stripped model of this? Probably not. But the fact that they released it and then people started to replicate the results. Remember, the science is not about running a study and reporting something. Okay, that's what DeepSeek did, right? They ran a study, supposedly, and they reported something. Okay, that's not science. That's just a bald claim. Science is when other people take that thing that you claim you did and they repeat it and they get the same answer. That's science. And that is now happening. And there are enough examples of it out there that my confidence level, this is real, has now gone up a great deal. The problem for all of the people in this space today is twofold. Number one, originally this tanked Nvidia's stock, and now it's up pretty big today. It's bouncing substantially. Problem with this concept is that Nvidia's valuation has been based upon them selling billions and billions of dollars worth of these extremely expensive chips. Well, if I only need 3% worth of the expenditure, and presumably also 3% of the power, the electricity to run this thing, Nvidia is going to sell chips, but how many billion-dollar orders all of a sudden become, $20 million instead, right? The other problem that all of the people that have already bought the billions of dollars worth of stuff have is they may very well be sitting on things that are approximately as valuable as a used beer can. Now, this has happened repeatedly in technology, and I have warned about it in this space, that this is going to happen because you have all these companies that are building this stuff out, but they're not getting any revenue from it. So you have, just as an example, you have these guys that, they're selling tokenized access or whatever have you, but it's being sold at a loss when you take all of the acquisition costs and the operational costs, everything else. And everyone is we'll build it and they will come and they will pay us. Okay, well, you built it. They may come, but what if they'll only give you 3 cents on the dollar instead of how you were pricing it before because somebody else is out there at the 3-cent price? How are you going to sell it for $1? You're not. And if all you can get is the 3 cents, you're going to go bankrupt because you're not going to be able to pay for the equipment, say much less the electricity to run it. And the idea that everyone will just pivot to this, well, that's nice, except what the hell do I do with the other 97% of the stuff? All right, so the creative destruction that's going to come out of this is very real. And exactly how impactful this is, I can't quantify yet. But I refuse to believe that with as many eggheads as are out there, that this kind of an approach, because I looked at how they did this, and these are the kinds of things that if I'd been writing AI-based code for the last couple of years, I would have found this. This wasn't something that is really all that tough to figure out. So who's been feathering nests and padding budgets? And the answer is all of them. Well, how do you do that? Well, I'll tell you how you do it. You get the Biden administration to say that they're going to actually slam anybody that tries to go outside the anointed people that are allowed to do this. I don't know if you heard that Mark Andreessen apparently was told by he's of some note in the technology world, uh, was told by the Biden administration not to invest in any kind of rogue AI operations because the Biden administration was going to step on him if he did. Now, if that turns out to be true, and it's not just, him shooting his mouth off, he's a pretty serious guy. He doesn't have a reason to shoot his mouth off. He has more money than God. Okay. Then we get into the NSF, we get into all the academics, we get into all of the other businesses, and maybe, just maybe, a group of dudes that were doing quant modeling and trading over in China decided that it was about time to go stick it in and break it off. And that's exactly what just happened.
So, trying to understand this from a simplification standpoint, for my 5-year-old brain here sounds to me, now correct me, this is like a grift, but also like an AI bust in terms of like the tech bubble, housing bubble. Am I understanding that correctly, Karl?
Yeah, well, again, the proof is not yet on the table.
And what you think, though?
But what I believe is that it's real. I think it's real. There are people now running around social media saying, "Oh, no. The real scandal here is that China managed to get 30 or 40,000 of these high-grade Nvidia chips that they weren't supposed to be able to buy because their ITAR is scheduled, so China cannot have them, but they got them." And if so, then everybody that works for Nvidia or is in their supply chain goes to prison, or at least is supposed to, because that's you break ITAR. I mean, even you as an individual, you do that, you're likely to end up on the wrong side of a jail cell. I don't think so. I think the more likely answer is that they built this using what they claim they built it with, which is the unrestricted, much less powerful stuff. And if that is in fact the case, then all of these valuations that have gotten cranked with data centers and all the world is going to be an AI, and God hate you if you happen to be a regular ordinary coder, because the world's going to change, yes, for sure. If you're somebody who makes your living grabbing pieces of code off Stack Overflow, and you can't think your way out of a paper bag, you've got a problem, because even with the more expensive models, the AI outperforms you, and there's no reason for you to have a job. All right, I mean, I can take 30 nearly worthless coders out of India that all basically are Stack Overflow stackers, and one person to review the stuff that the AI does, because of course the AI is going to get it wrong on a fairly decent number of bases, but it could put out 100 times as much output as one of these guys that is sitting there Googling Stack Overflow. So all those people are out of a job. But people who can actually think aren't, because the AI cannot think. AI, as I have said repeatedly, it's artificial, but it's not really intelligent. What it is a very fast sieve. So if you give it a bounded set of conditions, it can find what you're looking for quite rapidly. And if it exists in the world somewhere, it can be located. And it's very good at doing that, but that's what computers are very good at in general. So we're, but yes, this is a tectonic earthquake. I think the people that are glad-handing this and saying that, this is not a huge deal, this isn't going to bankrupt, no, wrong. These folks have spent several $100 billion over the last couple of years building data centers, stuffing them full of cards and machines, and in fact, they're even talking, I mean, some of these guys have let contracts to essentially buy nuclear power plants, for crying out loud, to feed these things with electricity. Those contracts are real and they're enforceable. And not only money that has been spent, but money that has been committed. Those people on the other side of those agreements aren't going to let these guys walk off. The only way you're walking off is if your stock is a zero and you're in the ground, and then the bankruptcy auction happens. So I think this is, assuming it's real, I don't see winners here. I see a lot of losers. And I think you're going to see the valuations come out of the market. And my guess is it's not going to take very long. You're going to see this. You're going to see the pivot within the next, probably this year, simply because it's going to take a little time for people to take that open source and, prove it up in their own workflows in their own companies. But once they do, there's no reason for them to pay anybody else for it anymore. And that's really the story, is that all these guys that think that they've got, the tiger by the tail, well, you do. Unfortunately, the tiger has teeth.
So you think that companies like DeepSeek is just proven that OpenAI is not necessary, or ChatGPT?
Yeah, well, OpenAI isn't open. Okay, what DeepSeek did is open source the software. That means that there's no secret anymore. There's no moat.
Like
The moat's
Napster, Carl.
gone.
Like Napster, Carl, in a sense.
Well, Napster didn't really open source anything. Napster just stole everything.
They borrowed it. They borrowed it.
Yeah, okay. Well, this isn't stolen. This was their work, and they gave it away. And of course, the obvious question is, why in the hell would you do that? And the answer is, sometimes people just want to see people burn, and maybe the Chinese government was involved in incentivizing them doing that. That wouldn't surprise me even a little. But the fact that it's out now. It's like any other genie. Once a genie, people talk about like the whole thing with reproduction rates and things like this. I'm like, look, you're never going to shove the fact that a human being can today, and we couldn't 100 years ago, but today you can choose to have sexual relations with somebody of the opposite sex and be 99.9% sure you're not going to get pregnant. Okay, that was not true 100 years ago. And no matter how much you may like or hate that genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in. And the same thing is true here. You now have this code base available to the public. Anybody that wants it can have it. You can't undo that. And people are going to take it, improve on it, build on it, and use it. It's kind of like trying to say, well, we're going to take Linux and make it disappear. No, you're not. Or FreeBSD. I have FreeBSD on my server over here. I can compile it anytime I'd want. You can't make it not be on my server. It was given, and it's freely available. So I can give it to someone else. It's perfectly legal for me to do that. And if you try to take the basic distributions away out of the public because whatever, the project decides they don't want to exist anymore, that doesn't stop me from publishing it. And it's the same thing's true here. It's been put in the public domain. It's no longer corked up. There's no moat. It's gone.
So they basically just gave the middle finger to all these tech companies that are over here. And so, I mean, everybody's talking about Nvidia, but this could be the catalyst to bring it down.
I think Nvidia has a serious problem, simply in terms of order book, and I don't think Nvidia as a company disappears. I highly doubt that they're levered to the point that they would end up being bankrupted by this. I mean, let's face it, they make excellent graphics cards. I've got 3 of them here at the house. They're, if you do movie production or something like that, or video or whatever, hell, the computer that you use to process this and put it up probably has an Nvidia card in it. That's not going to go away. That business doesn't go away. Selling GPUs that are used to process AI doesn't go away either. But if I only need 3% as many of them as I needed before, how many GPUs do I sell? Okay, that's the essence of the problem, right? Is that you've taken, A0 off the cost, therefore you've taken A0 off the revenue line, at least in that line of work. Now, that doesn't impact the other lines of work. You look at any movie that's in a theater today, and the probability is that the production was done, quite possibly in Resolve, which I use myself, but on in a room full of machines that have NVIDIA graphics cards in them. because that's what renders out. That's it's the editing deck and the rendering process. It's done, and that business isn't going anywhere. It's, but yeah, this is a tectonic shift. It's kind of like it's sort of like the shift that happened when the internet went from dial-up on modems. We had 56K ones, and before that we had 28.8 ones. And then all of a sudden, out of the middle of nowhere, here comes the cable company with 10 megabit service. Okay, and the cable companies did that through what in many cases their business model was predicated on a cost shift. They were building out the infrastructure using pay-per-view movies, which is how they were able to offer it at the price they have. I don't know if you've noticed, but the price has gone up an awful lot since everybody's been cutting the cord, right? That would have something to do with not having that back channel revenue anymore. But the fact of the matter is that was a monstrous disruption. It essentially extinguished the dial-up internet business within a very short period of time. And I mean, it didn't get rid of the internet, still the internet. In fact, you have better internet now than you had then. But it did change the business model. And I think that's certainly happening here. We're going to see the same kind of thing happen in this case.
So Nvidia is not going away, but the valuation, how large they are, that might significantly change.
Well, I'm not paying that kind of a multiple unless I have, this is always the problem with this kind of pumped up multiple, and it's across everywhere. I mean, you see it in places that make absolutely no sense today. I mean, Costco is a retailer, right? Very successful business. They have a very long history of managing to grow operating earnings by about 10% a year. And they do that by opening new stores because their margin really can't expand much. I mean, they sell commodities when you think about it, soup and
hot dogs,
hot dogs and whatever, right? But I mean, they're a retailer, all right? I mean, they're a grocery store basically, along with pants and everything else. But somehow, I mean, if you look at that over a period of time, and they obviously have a great management team because their operating earnings consistency is very good. But their base margin is what looks like any other retailers. They ought to be selling at 15 times earnings or something like that. And the last time I looked, it was 53. Well, how in the hell do you justify 53 times earnings for a company that has a decade-long record of putting up a 10% expansion operating? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, that's not to say, I'm not saying they don't have a great business. They do have a great business. I'm saying the valuation, what the shares are selling for, makes no sense whatsoever. And the only reason they keep doing that is because somebody, everyone who buys it thinks the next guy is going to come along and give more for it. And the same thing's true here with Nvidia and all these other companies that have been getting cranked tremendously from this. I mean, Amazon, they're a retailer, okay, for the most part. But everybody thinks that AWS is going to be the be-all, end-all of it and eat everybody in their compute services. Every single cloud hosting company on the planet has come out with some kind of AI-focused service that they're selling. What's the valuation on this stuff? Well, the market says it's sky high. It's to the moon, Alice. Boy, that's a hell of a bet on a forward basis. And how many of these guys have gone out and have, they've got spades in the ground and laying concrete and putting up data centers on the basis of all of this, and then trying to figure out where they're going to get the electricity to run them. If you happen to be a Green New Deal adherent, why are you in support of these guys burning up gigawatts of electricity for something that, I mean, let's face it, it's not as good as a skilled coder. And how many watts does my brain burn? About 20. So you want to put some gigawatts into doing something that, somebody, all right, you got to pay me a decent amount of money for that. But you're going to put gigawatts of energy into something that a human brain consumes 20 watts of power to do? The logic there befuddles me. But this is the world we live in today. I think this is the pin, ultimately, much like it was in 2000 with the tech space, and that you had all these companies that said they were going to own the world, and they were going to, they were claiming global GDP 10 times over from their projections. Um, that was not going to happen. It didn't. And a significant percentage of those firms were zeros, and the ones that survived, got cut in half, cut in 80%, 90% losses, but they still had operating businesses. They didn't go away. They just came back to earth.
So you think this is the pin that's going to pop, that could potentially pop?
Yeah, I mean, again, you've got to see the replication happen at scale, okay? When people start taking this source code and putting it in and actually putting it into business cases and showing that, yes, indeed, this works. Now, all of a sudden, the argument for building out these hyperscale data centers at size to run this as a service goes poof. It's gone.
What does that do then to this, let's say for the stock market example, because Nvidia has just got such a huge valuation right now.
It's not just Nvidia, it's the entire NASDAQ. It crashes all of it.
What's the argument then? I saw somebody, I don't remember who wrote it yesterday, and the internet never lies, Karl. It's undefeated. But Trump could do some type of executive order against China, but as
So
what you've just said, it's too late, right? It's out.
Yeah, so go ahead, executive order it. I can compile the source code and run it on my computer here in the basement.
So nothing can be done at this point.
Genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in. Now the question is, how many churches is it going to step on?
Right, how many is it going to burn?
A lot.
And you think it'll take as long as upwards of this whole year for it to see what the damage is going to be?
Well, I don't know. But like I said, the art of science is replication. Okay, it's not discovery. Replication has started. There's enough of it at this point that my confidence level that it's real has gone up. I mean, when I first saw the announcement, I gave this thing 50-50, that this was, there was a decent chance China was pulling everybody's, short hairs. I'm now of the opinion that it's probably 80% likely exactly as sold. And it'll be a while before we know that, for sure. But, if I happen to have a machine with a couple of terabytes of RAM laying around, you'd bet I'd have this thing running on it right now. I don't, and I don't have a use case to do it other than just to do it. It's not cheap, okay, to put even by consumer standards, it's not cheap, but by the standards of the billions of dollars that were formerly required to do this, as opposed to now being 400,000 or 500,000. And for most larger firms, that's not a lot of money. Why in the hell would they outsource that to somebody?
This is it almost sounds like a weapon. China did this intentionally just to potentially nuke the NASDAQ and some of these big companies.
Michael, we did this, okay? If you blow a bubble through collusive practices, the things that you're not supposed to do, are supposed to be felonies. It's not just a bad idea or unethical. It's illegal. And somebody else comes along and pops it. Problem's yours. You deserve it.
You're right. I didn't look at it like that. Because
Well,
we overinflated this on purpose to grift and sell it at a much higher price than what it should have ever been. So
That's right.
China comes back and says, all right, here's what it really is. Here's
Up
transparency.
yours. That's right. I mean, do I like China? No, and a lot of the things they do are crap and should be stepped on. This one's our fault. We did this. We deserve it. We deserve all the fallout from it too.
So with that being said, let's say that your assessment is correct, right? And this does work. These people, nobody holds themselves accountable. There's never accountability. No. So how will they scramble for all this
Well, when your stock price gets cut by 90%, it's kind of tough, isn't it? I mean, you can't exactly sanction the guys that wrote this. They published it. There was years ago when I was running my internet company, there was a kerfluffle like this, but not at this level of scale. But there was one over encryption. And the U.S. government tried to ban civilian possession of encryption algorithms. They actually tried to make it illegal. They threatened to throw people in jail for it. And the response from Zimmerman, who's a PGP author, along with a bunch of other people, was he printed up a bunch of T-shirts with the actual code on the T-shirt, started selling them for dirt cheap. So yeah, it was a T-shirt. It was, $8 or whatever. Well, you're walking around, First Amendment, buddy, because I mean, he had released the code publicly. It was published. So all these people, I mean, the nerds of the day knew what it was. Everybody else were like, what the hell is that? I knew what it was as soon as I saw it. I'm like, oh, okay, there we go. Well, needless to say, that whole let's throw people in jail for this went exactly nowhere, right?
So it would be a bailout, you think? An AI bailout?
No, there isn't. How do you bail people out on this? I mean, it's there isn't really anything you can bail out. What are you gonna do? Hand Nvidia $1 trillion for nothing? That's not gonna happen.
Could this derail the whole economy? Seeing these values plummet?
Well,
and before you answer that, because I feel like the system is so fragile right now that, and you've been assessing this, following this a lot longer than I have, but it feels like we're hanging on by a thread. And maybe it always has felt that way, and we just keep limping along. But something like this, I mean, this could be an unexpected body shot that could, with the fragility of the system, could KO it.
Well, what I said about Trump coming into office before the new year, I always write a prediction ticker. And what I pointed out is that given where valuations were and the level of hype that was surrounding all of the technology areas of the economy and healthcare and everything else, that the odds of him getting through a 4-year term without having it blow up in his face is essentially zero. I would not want that bet. It's a loser. And so the choice is not, will you manage to pull it off without it happening? Because the answer is no. The question is, when would you like it? And the problem he has as president, and I hope he has thought about this, and he's got some people that are not blowing smoke up his butt like he had during his first term, where he was believing that everything was, unicorns and rainbows, is that you do not want this to happen next September, 2 months in front of the midterm elections. Because if you do, if it happens then, you lose both houses of Congress. And at that point, your term may as well be over. You're going to sit in the White House and do nothing because you're not going to get a single thing you want out of Congress, ever. So if you are not very sure you can get away with it for 4 years, and he won't, I'm absolutely certain there's no way that's going to happen, then you take the hit right now, and you actually provoke it. You go ahead and you do it. And you look at what Homan's doing, okay, with the illegal invaders that are being deported. And you look at some of the other policy decisions, the EOs that have come out, freezing all federal appropriations, all grant processes. Now that's going to be challenged. It's probably constitutional. I'm willing to bet he wins, provided that it is in conformance with the EOs, because there was a thing called impoundment that got tossed after Nixon was in office, and it was legislation that was passed. So he can't use impoundment because impoundment doesn't exist anymore. It was taken away from the executive. However, this isn't impoundment. There are people in social media arguing that it is. It's not. It is, okay, you had these EOs, which have no force of law on DEI and things like this. I just tore those up. He has the right to do that. Executive orders have no permanence beyond the current administration, ever. And in fact, every one of them, if you read them, says explicitly, these create no due process rights, they create no rights in law, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Every single one of them has that boilerplate at the end, and that's because that's the truth. So he's tore that up. And on top of that, he's throwing people out that have no right to be here. And we are talking about, over the last few years, millions. Now, think about what this does. This is going to get rid of a decent amount of labor here in the United States. It is also going to drop demand. If you're an American, this is good twice. Number one, your wage base goes up. Fewer people to work, the price of labor goes up. Basic supply and demand economics 101. The second thing is, a lot of scarce things that we currently are paying too much for, like, for example, housing, have less demand and those prices go down. That means you as an American win twice. Now you take all the other things that come out of there, the illegal aliens that are driving without any driver's licenses and insurance, and therefore you're paying in your car insurance price for somebody who has no insurance and no money. And so when they hit you, somebody has to pay that, and the person who pays it is you. And you're paying that in your insurance premiums. That goes away. The imputed costs of crime from these people in the economy goes away. These are all essentially backdoor taxes that you pay as an American. Those are going away. Now, Trump is doing a lot of these things, and he's being very aggressive with them. If this is a legitimate counterbalance to the sort of dislocation and disruption that is likely to come in the asset markets. And if he is deliberately provoking that correction, then I give the guy credit for actually having the foresight to both mitigate the damage to the extent that you can for ordinary working people, and doing it through basic unescapable laws of economics. He's not handing anybody anything. He's not doing, he's not writing checks. He's cutting the cost of doing things that you have to do in order to survive, and at the same time he's boosting the wage base. That's a double win. And then, okay, so who gets reamed? A bunch of people that have been living high on the hog, they haven't earned a single penny of it. It's all just from their stock trading. They haven't put a single dollar of actual output, a single thing of output into the economy, and yet they've benefited from it. Well, guess what? It wasn't real. It was all a mirage, and now it's gone. That cuts the income inequality and the wealth inequality down to size as well. I think, I mean, if that's what he's got in his mind, and that's what he does, and he takes the hit now, and we get a massive correction in the asset markets somewhere between now and the end of the year. And then we're on the upside. We've got, hey, listen, we still need houses, right? So all of a sudden you got a team of Americans out there framing houses. Well, those are all people that didn't have jobs before. Now they've got jobs. All right? We're on the mend coming into June, July of next year. Oh, now that looks pretty good. Yeah, there was a huge crash. And guess what? Since it all happened in the first 6 months or whatever of Trump's presidency, guess who he blames it on? And not inappropriately either. He can lay most of it off on Biden and the Biden administration. And he wouldn't be wrong to do it. Now, he was responsible for some of it during the first part of COVID because he was in office then. But he can legitimately lay most of it off on Joe's presidency and Joe's administration. And I think the American people will buy it if the recovery is underway by the time we get to the midterms. But that means he's got to take the hit now. You can't try to stretch it out for another year, because if you do, you're going to be the one that gets bent over the table when the election comes.
There's a lot to digest right now. What kind of crash would we be looking at potentially in terms of impacting everyday Americans?
Well, the stock market, you could easily see 50 or more percent. Easily half, maybe 80. In the NASDAQ, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 80 or 90%.
Would that happen fast, Karl? A drop like that?
There's the old saying is the stocks take the escalator up and sometimes the elevator, and sometimes they just go out the window.
I mean, do you anticipate this could be the greatest crash in history?
Yeah, I think the thing is, 1929 was, of course, a monstrous crash, right? But it was the stupidity of the Hoover administration and what they did afterwards that led to the Depression and led to the 1930s. The crash in the asset markets, a lot of people don't realize, in 1873, there was a monstrous asset market collapse. It was kicked off by railroads that got way over their skis, issuing a lot of debt for what was supposed to be the nirvana of gold and silver out west. Well, there was gold and silver out there, but not nearly enough to support all the debt that they issued to build all these railroads. And as a result, it blew up in everyone's face. You don't even hear about this in history books, and yet that collapse was the sharpest crash ever recorded in American history. But here's the other side of it. It's not counted. The reason it's not in the history books as a depression is it didn't last long enough. The entire thing was over. We were back to full employment in about 18 months. And the United States economy posted up the largest gains in gross output ever recorded. Now, it was, at the time, we didn't do GDP. We did what's called GNP. It's calculated differently. But it was the fastest growth rate ever in American history. We've never even gotten anywhere close to it before. But the bottom line was that all of the companies that got out over their skis and did stupid things, they blew up, they went bankrupt, and Hoover, by the time, at the time, was in the government, and he was in charge of Treasury, and he urged that bail people out. We have to do something about this. We can't let this happen. And the rest of the government said, no, absolutely not. The president said, no, we're not doing that. You did stupid things. You pay for it. Too bad. Bankruptcy court, the judges over there, go file. And all the crap got cleared out. But you got to think about how that ends up working if the government does not interfere. Because if I bought up all this stuff and then I blow up and I go bankrupt, I paid for it, but I blew up. Well, now you can come along and buy it for 5 cents or 10 cents on a dollar in a bankruptcy auction. Well, now you've got a business that is 90% cheaper in terms of its physical plant to operate. Well, that means you can undercut everybody else, right? I mean, you have a much cheaper basis of operation than the other guy does. That's a great thing from your point of view. You're going to be able to hire people. You're going to be able to pay them more because you've got a lower cost of operations in all other respects. There's nothing bad that comes out of this except for the poor sucker that did the stupid thing, but he got what he deserved. That's the right way to handle this. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in Trump's head, okay? But I hope he has enough people around him that have pointed out to him that the bubble level asset game, and he's made a lot of money from it too, so I'm not in any way confident that he's not going to try to do that because, let's face it, that's what property developers do, right? And that's his background. But if he's come to the realization that this cannot go on a permanent basis, and there's some indications from his early policy moves that it wasn't just campaign promises, that he really did mean some of it. If he follows through on it, he will preside over what is probably the largest asset crash in the history of the country, short of maybe 1873, but probably also, certainly in the modern era, the fastest and most robust recovery, and we'll take back an awful lot of our manufacturing from overseas at the same time. It'll all flow back over here because it'll be so much cheaper to bring that stuff back in here rather than have to deal with the shipping, and it'll get redomiciled in the United States.
My concern is listening to you is because we're so society-wise, our culture is so weak and fragile versus, and again, you correct me here, but 29 or even 1873, people were tough. You didn't have mental health. You didn't have people glued to their phones. You didn't have people on seed oils,
I know.
So you throw some type of challenge or some adversity, 2020 showed that society crumbled.
Well, strap on the big boy pants and maybe a couple of six guns on the side. I mean, yeah, I don't, nobody said it was going to be easy. All right. I mean, there was no easy way out of this box. But we can certainly, do we have the thing is, America has resources that many other nations do not. We have the ability to do this. We have the capacity. We have 400 years of coal in the ground, as an example. The green scam, at least by Trump's CEOs, is gone. Okay, now does he mean it? Well, TVA has, here in this area, has taken a wrecking ball to most of their coal-fired power plants, but not all of them. Some of them are still there. Okay, well, guess what? We have 400 years worth of fuel to run those things. If we take the thorium out of the coal, which, by the way, is why burning coal causes lung cancer, because there's thorium in it, and you use that as a nuclear fuel, we have 400 years of not only electricity, but 400 years of diesel, gasoline, kerosene, and other hydrocarbon fuels without having to import a single barrel from anybody. We can do that right now. We know how to do it. Technologically, we know how to do it. It's not a discovery. The Germans perfected this during World War II. We know how to do this. So there are paths that are available to us. And behind every unit of economic activity is a unit of energy. That is a basic, fundamental physical fact. The laws of thermodynamics apply to everything, including economics. And we have the ability to be energy independent. Most of the world does not. We do. And that is something that we can do. We must do it. And, again, the early signs are that Trump gets it. Does he get it at a level that he's going to kill the grift and go after the stuff that we know how to do and that has long duration and that people can plan around? Well, you can hope, okay? But one of the things you have to realize is that Jimmy Carter killed the nuclear reprocessing industry in the United States with an executive order. And here we are 50 years later, and it has not been restarted. And the reason is that if you do it through executive order, nobody's going to make 20-year plans when they could get screwed again in 4. And heavy industry, expensive things that have long amortization schedules, you cannot plan on those within an administration. They have to be done across generations even, but certainly across a decade or two. And that means that Congress has to get in there with something that is unbreakable without supermajorities. And there needs to be a pivot in that area. Now, will we get that? I don't know. I mean, Trump's one guy. He cannot do all of this by executive order in a way that actually brings the manufacturing and the industry into the country in a way that's sustainable, particularly when it comes to energy resources, simply because his administration's over in 4 years. And nobody's going to be putting spades in the ground with 30 and 40-year amortization schedules on a 4-year timeline. It's just not going to happen. The next person that comes into that office could turn around and kill it all again, and then all that money that they spent goes up in smoke. They're not going to do it. You have to give them the certainty that that's not going to happen. But that is within his power, providing that he gets Congress involved in it. So it can be done.
Plus, I think in terms of, in 2008, had the iPhones been where they are today in terms of the apps and the ability to share information so quickly, right, through the various platforms, how much worse would that have been? Because you would have had the fear mongers out there. I mean, it was bad, but in terms of, it would have been, I think, potentially worse. More bank runs.
Well,
do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, but I don't care about things like bank runs. And the reason is that before I started going after the actual bankers that were responsible for it, giving liar loans to people and doing things that were they're crimes, okay? Nobody went to jail. And I got blackballed off all the networks because I pointed out that these were not mistakes. These are felonies. Where are the handcuffs? All right. Well, all right, fine. So the bank blows up. It goes under. Um, so what? You really think there won't be another bank there tomorrow?
No,
Of
no,
course
no,
there will.
no, no. I don't mean like that. What I meant by that is in 2008, with the ability, you didn't have the ability to share information to where, the whole sector would have collapsed. Now, fast forward to where we are now. As soon as that
Hmm.
stock market, let's say hypothetically, the Nasdaq, drops 70, 80%, you're going to have so much more fear out there, so much more attacking on this administration. The enemy is going to come out, or the opposite side is going to come out and really try to fearmonger even more to make the situation, so much more worse than what it could have been. That's what I mean by that.
Well, sure. And that's, that's going to happen. Um, I, just look at what happened with all these drones, right? We're being invaded by Russia, China, aliens. um, no, none of the above. Now, I still, authorized research. I said at the time it was going on that yeah, those were authorized, and I have a pretty good idea that they believed that there was either a dirty nuclear device or a live fission-based bomb that had gotten into the country, and they were looking for it because that kind of material gives off a neutron signature that is absolutely detectable. And the reason you would fly it at night is because the sun interferes with the detectors and their accuracy. So if you're trying to find something like that, you don't know where it is, but you think it's in the US, you're going to be doing a lot of searching over anywhere that you think it might be. And it's really, really hard to hide something like that without it being detected if you move it. I mean, certainly if it's in a lead-lined bunker or something, you're not going to find it. But you can't make it go boom boom in the place you want it to go without moving it, right? So as soon as you try to move it, it's out in the open where it can be found, and I think that's what they were looking for. But as I said, I was absolutely certain that those were authorized activity, but I think that was what they were seeking. Now, they're not going to tell you if that was in fact the case, because that, especially at the time, that would have caused instant panic. If, oh, we think there's a nuclear bomb in New Jersey. Okay, yeah. No one is ever going to say that, right? Even if it's true.
Well, and then they didn't Caroline Levitt just say it was authorized by the FAA.
Well, as I said, it was
Yeah,
author. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, like I said, I think but I think that's what they were looking for. They obviously didn't find it. Okay, so all right, so the intelligence was no good. That happens, but I think that's what they believed that had occurred.
As we've spent, almost an hour and a half talking about this, is this the biggest concern right now for you?
Well, um, I look at these kinds of economic dislocations as opportunities. I don't. I mean, if you're levered, if you're out over your skis, and you've bought assets at ridiculous prices, uh, then you have reason to be very worried. Certainly, if you've bought a house in the last couple of years and you think that $700,000 is actually reasonable, and you go back and you look on Realtor.com and you see that in 2019 it sold for 3. Um, it's likely to sell for 3 again. If you owe 650 on it, you got problems. Okay. Um, that's bad. If you and by the way, if you refinanced it, they can come after all your other assets, because the only way that you have protection against that is on a purchase money first that has not been refinanced. So all those people who rolled debt over to get lower rates during the COVID years, they are potentially really in trouble. But that's don't do stupid things. I had people ask me all the time about that. Well, I could roll this 5% mortgage into 2.5 and da 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 da. I'm like, okay, what happens if you do that? You took some of this cash out, you spent it, and the price crashes, and oh, by the way, now you owe more than it's worth. And, well, I'll just give the keys back. No, you won't. They'll come after everything you have. And they'll be able to do it because it's not a purchase money mortgage anymore. And it's like, and by the way, yes, they will sue you for $200,000. Okay. So, I mean, you know, but you can't control, people that made dumb mistakes. I personally, I look at it as an opportunity. All right. I have a daughter. She does not own property at present. She'd like to, but at these valuations, she'd be out of her mind to buy a house. But if there's a collapse in the asset markets and she could buy something that is has some wear and tear and it's got some problems and the people that are selling it can't afford to make the repairs, so nobody can get a mortgage because it needs this, it needs a roof, it needs this done to it or that done to it, and the mortgage company won't write on it. Okay, well, guess what? For cash, that today that was a $300,000 house. For cash, maybe that's a $75,000 house. Well, okay, 75 grand, and we'll get out the hammers and the nails, and we'll go over there and take my saw over there, and we'll go fix what's broken. And oh, by the way, the insurance will be cheap because that's not 300 grand anymore. You're insuring at 75. What's not to like? I mean, could I sell my place right now for close to double what I paid for it? Yeah, probably, but then where am I going to live? In my truck? All right? I mean, that's the problem, is people think, well, this is real money. No, it's not. You sell a bubble house, and you get more than you should for it, but the one that you buy to replace it is equally bubbled. You paid more for it. On top of that, you get a tax reset out of that. You might have to pay capital gains tax, depending on how much you made off of doing it. There's no logic. You didn't make any money. The only way that you profit from that is if you die, and then you don't get to spend it. Your heirs get the cash.
Unless it's a scenario where you're selling it and you're moving in with somebody where you have no payment or something along the lines of that. But yeah.
I mean, but everyone needs a place to live, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. But, but think about it. If you don't own a house, do you want high prices or you want low prices? Well, duh. Right?
I wouldn't buy a house right now. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see where all this is going. These values aren't real.
No. And I fully expect that this is going to crack, and when it does, it's going to be pretty ugly. And I mean, I've already, look, I follow the housing market around here all the time. Okay, ever since I've moved here, it's just it's just part of the business intelligence, if you will. And on the higher end, and we're not talking about rental places that people had at Airbnbs. There was an absolutely stupendous craze on that during the time that everyone else was locked down because Tennessee was open. And I warned people not to buy into that it was going to be a huge mistake, because those values that they were getting were based on rental prices that there was no way they were going to be able to keep. Asheville opens back up, all of a sudden, supply goes way up. But now, in some of the higher end single family places, I've already seen 50% reductions. And we're talking about from what people thought they could get for it a couple of years ago to what it's now listed and in some cases has sold for and closed. Now, that's at the higher end of the market right now, but that's where it always starts. So, and that's half. I got a couple examples that are literally 50% cuts. They stuck them out there at no bites, lowered a little, no bites, falls off listing, comes back a little lower, no bites, no bites, no bites. Now it's half of what they were asking a couple of years ago. That's a real 50% reduction. It's real.
What about the rental market in your area?
Well, it's obscene right now. But, then again, there seems to be this shortage of Hispanic people that used to be all over the grocery stores every Friday. There don't seem to be as many of them. So most of those people were probably renting, right?
Do you see that going down as well?
Big time. Yeah. Take demand out of the picture. And when you think about it, that's at the lower end of the scale, right? I mean, the rental market for the people that were taking those apartments and those rental spots. That's of the most benefit to young people. That's going to have the biggest positive for people on the younger end of the scale. You see big whacks taken out of the rental prices for apartments. That's going to make a huge difference. It's a good thing.
It's a great conversation, Carl. Yeah, a lot to digest.
Oh, and I think it's just getting started with but we'll see. I mean, again, Trump is a showman. I mean, let's face it, The Apprentice, right? It looks like he means it this time. But I said when he was elected that the real test is going to be look at things February into March. Why? Because that's when the first chunk of the damage that Biden did with credit emission in the first couple of months of the fiscal year, which starts October 1st. The first month was clearly trying to essentially buy the presidency for his side of the aisle. He failed. Then he kept it up though through November, which didn't make any sense because at that point everybody knew he lost, right? And that Harris was not going to be president. But he did keep it up through there, and then in December it backed off a fair bit, but I think that was because Janet Yellen knew they were going to hit the debt ceiling, and she didn't want that to happen before the executive office got turned over. And boy, that timing was real convenient. That happened the day after the inauguration. But that's, I mean, that's what you can do when you're the Treasury Secretary and you're writing the checks. But that inflationary impulse was on the order of $600 billion, and that is in the system and can't be removed. So that's going to start to show up in the price indexes, especially on the producer side in February and March, and that's when the rubber's going to meet the road, because if Trump thinks he's going to avoid that, can't. It's already happened. And so the real question is, what's he do when it occurs? And that is when we'll know. Is this real or is this Memorex?
What can he do in that situation? I mean, Carl, you're talking 30, 40 days, 45 days.
He has to shut up about screaming at Powell to lower rates. We have to take the medicine, and then he has to go full bore on getting the costs down. And the way you do that is by killing demand. And the fastest and easiest way to do that is go after employers under 8 U.S.C. 1324, which mandates a 10-year prison term for employing or harboring illegals. You go after the landlords, you go after the employers, you put E-Verify in, you tell them all, if we catch you employing an illegal alien, you're going to prison, end of conversation. If we catch you renting to one, you're going to prison, end of conversation. You are going to hire Americans, you're going to rent to Americans. The cost of labor will go up and the cost of housing will go down fast. And that's about the only counterbalance he has available to that inflationary impulse. But you will get an asset market crash out of that. There's no question about it. But that's the only sane reaction when that data shows up. But if he goes the other way and he tries to print over the top of it, then he's going to fail. And at that point, then we're in for a real mess.
I was going to ask you, what do you think Powell will do now? I mean, he knows all this.
Yes, he does, and I don't know. Everyone says that the Fed is a primarily political animal, but he does understand the risks. He knows what happens if it gets out of control, and everyone dies the same way and just as easily. You can have all the money in the world, but that doesn't change that. Okay. Remember that everyone said that Milei was never going to manage to pull any of this off in Argentina. Well, so far he has. I mean, a perfect record? No, but look at where he came from and where he is now. It's a lot of progress in a short time. And there's no evidence that it's reversing either. So, we'll see what we'll see what the reaction is out of Trump. And like I said, but February, early March is when you're going to start to see that data show up. There's absolutely nothing Trump can do to change that. It's going to happen. It's all going to be about what he does in response. That's the whole question on the table. And we'll know about that time. And then I'll either be able to say, okay, this guy's actually got his act together, and we're going to have a rough ride here. It's going to be, a rough 8-9 months, maybe a year. But as we come into the midterm elections, we're going to be on the upswing. We're going to be through it. Where will the market be then? Well, it might be half or less of where it is today, but things will be improving. Employment will be on the upswing. Wages will be rising. Asset prices will be lower. That feels pretty good. If you got an extra couple $100 in your wallet and the cost of your rent went down by 30%. That's not so bad, right?
Where can people find you, Karl?
Market-ticker.org, and make sure you look on the right-hand side after you go to the page. There's a click link there that says what the media does not want you to read, because only half the content is on the advertising side due to various advertisers deciding that they don't want me talking about things like fecundity and the disincentives for people to have children.
I could keep going with all this, but I figure, maybe next week or the week after we do another one, see where things are.
Sure. You bet. You bet. Anytime.
Karl, as always, thanks for doing this. Great
you.
Conversation. I'm not just saying this. I think this is our best one yet, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
No, it'll go up as soon as it gets posted over to me. So, plus, of course, everybody gets it on your side, too.
Mic drop.